A lot of used fishing boats look like incredible bargains sitting on a dealer lot or in a driveway with a for sale sign. But some of those bargains turn into financial nightmares within a single season. Certain types of boats are known for recurring structural problems, expensive repairs, poor resale value, and maintenance issues that never show up in the listing photos. Today we're breaking down 7 types of used fishing boats you should think twice about, and exactly why. One of them surprises almost everyone, because it often comes from a category buyers assume is one of the safest purchases on the used market. Let's get into it. Number 7. Older deck boats built with wood cord transoms and stringers, especially models from the 1990s and early 2000s, tend to look fantastic in photos and feel solid on a quick test walk around the marina. That's exactly why so many first-time buyers fall for them. The wide open deck space, comfortable seating, and family-friendly layout make them attractive, and the price on the used market is often lower than comparable fiberglass stringer boats. The problem shows up once you start looking underneath the surface. Wood coring inside a fiberglass stringer or transom works fine as long as water never reaches it. But over 15 or 20 years, small cracks in the gel coat, old screw holes from mounted accessories, or a poorly sealed transom drain can let moisture in slowly. Once wood coring gets wet, it doesn't dry out on its own, and it doesn't fail quickly either. It rots gradually, which means a boat can feel completely solid for years while the structure underneath is quietly weakening. Repair costs here can be significant. Replacing a rotted transom or stringer system often means cutting into the hull, which is labor-intensive and expensive no matter who does the work. Reliability itself isn't usually the issue with these boats, since the engines and electrical systems can be perfectly fine. The real risk is structural, and structural problems don't always show up during a casual inspection. Resale value on these boats tends to be inconsistent, since informed buyers have gotten more cautious about wood cord construction over the years, while less informed buyers still pay based on cosmetic condition alone. Anyone without experience assessing hull integrity should avoid buying one of these boats without a proper marine survey. That said, if a specific boat has clean survey history, has always been stored covered or under a roof, and shows no signs of soft spots when checked with a moisture meter, it can still be a reasonable buy. The lesson here is simple. On any boat with wood coring, the survey matters more than the price tag. Number 6. Small aluminum john boats and utility fishing boats built for freshwater use sometimes get resold years later as if they're ready for coastal or brackish water fishing. Buyers are drawn in by the low price and simple mechanical design, since aluminum boats have a reputation for being tough and low maintenance. That reputation is generally true in freshwater, but it can fall apart quickly once one of these boats spends time around saltwater or brackish estuaries. Aluminum reacts poorly with saltwater exposure over time, especially around rivets, welds, and anywhere dissimilar metals like steel fittings or bronze hardware come into contact with the hull. This creates galvanic corrosion, a slow electrochemical process that eats away at the aluminum from the inside, often in places you can't see without pulling equipment off the boat. Owners who unknowingly buy one of these boats after it's spent a season or two in salt water sometimes discover pitting, weakened seams, or leaks that seem to appear out of nowhere. Repair costs vary depending on severity, but in bad cases, the hull integrity itself becomes questionable, which is a serious problem for a boat that's supposed to be simple and low risk. Reliability of the boat itself, meaning the motor and basic systems, usually isn't the concern here. The concern is hull condition, and that's exactly why this type of boat catches so many buyers off guard. Resale value tends to hold up fine as long as the boat has a clean saltwater history, but drops significantly once corrosion becomes visible. This type of boat should be avoided by anyone who can't verify where it's been used throughout its life. If you're looking at an aluminum john boat and the seller can confirm it's spent its entire life in freshwater, that changes the picture considerably, and it can still be an excellent, low-cost, low-maintenance option. The lesson here is that with aluminum boats, saltwater history matters as much as the boat's age. Number 5. Budget-priced center consoles from lesser-known import builders that flooded the market in the early 2000s often show up used at prices that seem too good to pass up. They typically look similar to more established brands at a glance, with comparable layouts and similar-sized outboards, which makes them tempting for buyers who assume they're getting the same value for less money. If you're finding this guide helpful, take a second to like the video, subscribe to Harbor Hook Boats, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future buying guides that could save you thousands before your next boat purchase. The reality with many of these budget import boats is that construction quality varied significantly depending on the specific builder and year, and manufacturer support for parts and warranty issues often disappeared entirely once the company scaled back or shut down. That creates a frustrating situation for owners years later, when a specific hardware part, hatch, or live well fitting simply isn't available anymore because nobody manufactures it. Electrical systems on some of these boats were also wired inconsistently, without the same attention to corrosion-resistant marine-grade components used by more established builders. Over time, that can lead to intermittent electrical problems that are difficult to diagnose because the wiring itself wasn't documented or standardized. Build quality issues aside, these boats aren't necessarily unreliable in a dangerous sense. Many run just fine for years. The real risk is long-term ownership cost and frustration, since sourcing replacement parts or getting anything repaired properly can turn into a scavenger hunt. Resale value also tends to be weak, since informed buyers steer away from names they don't recognize, regardless of how the boat performs on the water. Anyone who values predictable long-term ownership and easy access to replacement parts should avoid buying one of these boats. The exception is a buyer who's mechanically inclined, comfortable sourcing generic marine parts, and buying the boat cheap enough that any future headache is priced into the deal from day one. The lesson here is that with lesser-known builders, availability of parts and support matters just as much as the condition of the boat itself. Number 4. Older bass-style boats with wood transoms and high-hour outboards show up constantly on the used market, often at prices that seem incredibly attractive compared to newer models. Buyers assume that because the boat looks clean and the seller says it runs great, they're getting a straightforward deal. The issue with many of these boats is twofold. First, older wood transoms on trailerable bass boats face the same slow rot risk we already discussed with deck boats, except transom stress here is higher because these boats are designed to run at high speeds with a heavy outboard mounted directly on that transom. A weakened transom under that kind of load isn't just a repair inconvenience, it's a real safety concern. Second, high-hour outboards, especially older two-stroke models, often reach a point where a rebuild becomes necessary sooner than buyers expect. Two-stroke outboards from this era can run reasonably well right up until a major component fails, since compression and oil mixing issues don't always show obvious warning signs during a quick test run at the dock. Reliability concerns here are real, and repair costs can escalate quickly if both the transom and the engine need attention around the same time. Resale value on these boats has softened over the years as buyers have become more aware of aging two-stroke technology and transom fatigue in older base boats. This type of boat should be avoided by buyers who aren't prepared to invest in a full pre-purchase inspection, covering both the transom and a compression test on the engine. However, if a boat like this has a documented engine rebuild, a transom that's been inspected and confirmed solid, and reasonable hours for its age, it can still be a smart, affordable entry point into serious base fishing. The lesson here is that on performance-oriented boats, the transom and the engine need to be evaluated together, not separately. Number 3. Boats that previously lived in hurricane-prone coastal regions sometimes get resold, sometimes across state lines, without full disclosure of storm-related history. This is one of the more concerning categories on this list, because the damage isn't always obvious, and sellers don't always know the full history themselves if they bought the boat secondhand as well. A boat that sat in floodwater, even briefly, can suffer from issues that go far beyond cosmetic damage. Electrical systems exposed to saltwater flooding often develop corrosion inside wiring harnesses and connectors that isn't visible from the outside but causes intermittent failures for years afterward. Engines that were submerged, even partially, can have internal corrosion that dramatically shortens their remaining lifespan, even after a professional flush and service. Fuel systems are another concern, since floodwater contamination in a fuel tank can lead to ongoing performance issues long after the boat has been cleaned up and put back into service. Detecting this kind of history requires checking the boat's title for flood or salvage designations, cross-referencing the hull identification number through relevant databases, and ideally getting a marine survey from someone experienced in identifying flood damage specifically. Reliability on a previously flooded boat can be genuinely unpredictable, which is part of what makes this category risky. Resale value is often artificially low, which is exactly what draws buyers in without realizing why the price seems so good. This type of boat should be avoided by anyone who can't verify its storm and flood history through a title check and independent survey. The one exception worth mentioning is a boat that was professionally restored after minor water exposure, with full documentation of every system that was inspected, cleaned, or replaced. Even then, most experienced buyers would rather pass and look elsewhere, unless the price reflects a significant discount for that added risk. The lesson here is that flood history is one of the few issues that can hide almost completely, which is why documentation and title verification matter more here than with almost anything else on this list. Number 2. High-hour offshore fishing boats still running older two-stroke outboards are another category that catches experienced buyers off guard, mainly because the hull itself is often in genuinely excellent condition. These are typically well-built boats from reputable manufacturers, which is exactly why buyers let their guard down. The issue isn't the hull, it's the engines. Older two-stroke outboards, particularly ones with several thousand hours of offshore use, are approaching or past the point where a major rebuild or full replacement becomes necessary. Offshore use is harder on engines than casual inshore or lake use, since sustained high-speed running and constant exposure to saltwater spray accelerates wear on internal components. The tricky part is that these engines can run perfectly fine during a test drive and still be close to a significant failure. Compression can look acceptable on paper while individual cylinders are wearing unevenly. Replacing or rebuilding twin or triple older two-stroke outboards on a serious offshore boat is an expensive proposition, sometimes rivaling a meaningful percentage of what the boat itself is worth. Reliability concerns are significant here, not because the hull or the manufacturer has a bad reputation, but because the engines are simply aging out. Resale value on the boat itself often stays reasonably strong because of the hull's reputation, which paradoxically makes it easier for sellers to ask more than the boat is really worth once engine age is factored in properly. This type of boat should be avoided by buyers who aren't prepared to immediately budget for engine replacement or a major rebuild. It's a smart purchase, however, for a buyer who negotiates the price down specifically to account for engine age, or who plans to repower shortly after purchase anyway. The lesson here is that hull reputation and engine condition need to be evaluated completely separately, since one doesn't guarantee anything about the other. Number 1. This brings us to the boat category with the highest long-term ownership costs on this entire list, despite being one of the most popular types of used fishing boats on the market. Neglected pontoon-style fishing boats, particularly older tri-Toon models used for both family recreation and light fishing, rank as the riskiest used purchase for reasons most buyers never consider until it's too late. These boats are popular for good reason. They're comfortable, stable, family-friendly, and often priced attractively on the used market since so many were produced over the past 2 decades. Buyers frequently see them as a low-risk, low-maintenance option compared to a traditional fishing boat, and that assumption is exactly where the trouble begins. The core problem with older pontoon boats is that the deck itself is typically built from plywood, mounted on an aluminum frame, then covered with vinyl flooring or carpet. That deck sits directly above the pontoons, and water intrusion around fittings, rail mounts, or seam seals can slowly saturate the plywood underneath without any visible warning on the surface. By the time soft spots become noticeable underfoot, the deck may already require extensive replacement On top of deck issues, the aluminum pontoon tubes themselves can develop corrosion at weld points over time, especially on boats that have spent years in saltwater or brackish water without proper rinsing and maintenance. Internal baffles inside the tubes can also trap water, adding weight and reducing flotation performance in ways that aren't obvious from the outside. Reliability of the outboard motor on these boats is usually not the concern, since many pontoon boats use relatively low-stress engines that last a long time. The real ownership cost comes from deck replacement, which is a labor-intensive and surprisingly expensive repair given how simple these boats look, plus the harder-to-detect issue of pontoon tube corrosion and internal water intrusion. Resale value on neglected pontoon boats tends to drop sharply once deck problems become visible, since buyers who've been burned before know exactly what to look for. This type of boat should be avoided by anyone shopping based purely on price and cosmetic condition, especially without physically walking the entire deck to check for soft spots and without asking directly about maintenance and storage history. The exception here is a pontoon boat that's been consistently covered or stored indoors, has documented deck inspections, and shows no give anywhere when you walk it heel to toe. Under those conditions, an older pontoon boat can still be a completely reasonable and enjoyable purchase for years to come. The lesson from this final entry is the most important one on the entire list. A boat that looks the safest and simplest on the surface can quietly carry the highest hidden costs, and that's exactly why thorough inspection matters more than reputation, price, or first impressions. So what's the biggest takeaway from all 7 of these boats? Buying used is not inherently risky, and plenty of used fishing boats provide years of reliable, affordable enjoyment on the water. The real danger comes from skipping the inspection process because a boat looks clean, runs well on a short test, or comes from a name you recognize. Careful physical inspections, complete maintenance records, a proper marine survey, and a little patience almost always matter more than brand reputation alone. Focus on documented condition over marketing reputation, and you'll avoid the vast majority of expensive surprises that catch other buyers off guard. Thanks for watching. If this guide helped you think differently about your next used boat purchase, do us a favor and hit like, subscribe to Harbor Hook Boats, and turn on notifications so you never miss a future guide. Before you go, let us know in the comments, which fishing boat would you never buy used and why? We read every comment and might feature your answer in a future video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Harbor Hook Boats adventure.